thank you for taking a few minutes and hearing a message that we think is incredibly important for folks who are in the cybersecurity space to ingest and operationalize in their environments, and that is the importance of having a speed-centric cybersecurity posture. I'm going to talk at some length about why that's important later, but let's just get into it quickly. Widespread the problem is, you have to investigate indications of malicious activity in your environment before you can get a remediation plan and go ahead and hopefully eject that adversary from your environment if you've dealt with a breach. So this is pretty common depiction. We have a point of view. And you cannot do it by looking at them piecemeal. So move everything to a cloud-based architecture, and you'll get a much better sense of how to move, move throughout your environment with visibility, knowing what's happening at every given place. And that's important because adversaries find strange corners to hide in. We, having deployed out to everywhere in the environment, stream events back up to the cloud. From there, we can apply a bunch of machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms against them, get more enlightened detections and so forth, things that you've heard before. And that's how we go about doing the business of getting customers to an environment where they're able to move more quickly. Okay, so anyone who's seen really granular detection information might know something about this sequence of events, at least if you've done incident responses before. But picture a scenario where you have visibility to see a process execute, to see that process enumerate directories, to call an encryption routine. And this is something that people and enterprises everywhere are seeing all the time. You may have read about some specific events in the state and local sector. From my point of view, I think we're probably on borrowed time before you see something like this in the federal space or DoD. But essentially, this is just a ransomware attack. From a victim standpoint, if you don't have granularity to see very specific event information, it becomes very difficult to intervene in this process before you have an adversary crypt your active domain, and then you're off to the races with a big incident response. We think that understanding the adversary, who specifically is targeting you, is central, aside from the architectural issues that I mentioned before about making sure that you have good visibility in your environment. Understanding who's trying to attack you is central to being able to devise a threat model-informed defense. So that's why we spend a lot of energy trying to figure out who it is that's attacking customers. And not just based on what they're doing in the environment, although that's a critical piece of it, but also reading foreign military doctrine, researching intelligence agencies, being in criminal forums, understanding how criminal cybersecurity groups coordinate with each other, and so on and so forth. I say that to say because understanding who's attacking you and understanding how capable those adversaries are is the only way you're going to develop a solvent threat model to understand how much speed you need. Right? Speed is a good thing. If you have an incident, you can fix that in a day, a half day, an hour, something like that. That's shorter is always better than longer. But how much do you need to invest, not just in different tools, but do you need service providers? Do you need more people? How should you configure your people? And doing that on the basis of a guess is not going to get you to a place where you're able to quickly wrap your arms around the issue. So understanding the adversary, understanding how quickly they work. In this case, we said we want to have a data-driven approach to being able to give advice on this. So how do we do that? We looked at 30,000 attempted breaches over the course of a year that we were able to attribute to specific adversaries. We have cryptonyms that we use for different adversaries. So some of you may have heard about Fancy Bear or Cozy Bear or Gothic Panda or some such. Those are naming conventions that we use to describe different adversaries, right? So up on this chart right here, you have Russia, which we depict as a bear, China that we depict as a panda, let me see here, North Korea is Shalima, Iran's kitten, and so on and so forth. Right, criminal groups are spiders. And we said, now that we know who these adversaries are, and now that we have a bunch of data on how quickly they are able to go from an initial security incident all the way toward trying to successfully execute on their objective and environment, we can look at and say, if you're a customer and you have a sense that you're going to be attacked by Chinese intelligence agency or criminal group or Russian military unit, that sort of thing, you can really get some more information about how to inform your posture. So we have some specific times here. In the case of the bears, Russia, it's as little as 18 minutes. As little as 18 minutes to go from an initial foothold in your environment to being able to try and get to achieve your actions on objective. So some of you may be familiar with the sequences depicted on this slide. It's based on the MITRE attack framework, right? So we had MITRE colleague up here on the stage before. We think MITRE's done provided a significant public good by convening everybody in government and industry as sort of like herding cats, but applied some order to the chaos of different people thinking about intrusions in different ways. And by creating the framework, they've really helped people talk about what they're talking about. So in this case, you see a number of steps that goes from an adversary trying to get an initial foothold in an environment all the way toward expanding the scope of that breach. And the short version of this is that if you intervene at one of the earlier phases, and this isn't strictly linear, but generally an adversary gets in, they're going to try and get a foothold in the environment. They will try and escalate privileges. They will take steps to do persistence. So if you boot them out, they can come back in easily and so forth. And they generally move in sequence. So if you're able to intervene in one of those earlier phases, you can take something that would be a minor incident and keep it as a minor incident. Once the adversary has moved laterally, so they've gotten from an initial host in your environment into other hosts, you're now dealing with a complex incident. And it might be the type of thing that takes days or weeks to resolve. So those times that I showed on the last slide, 18 minutes, for Russian threat actors, for example, that's all it takes to get from one host to be able to now escalate privileges, move laterally. Now you're on a bunch of different hosts. And now, as a defender, the blue teams are, they're canceling their lunches, they're canceling their dinner plans, and they're at the office, right? So that's what we try to avoid. Next slide. This is really the key, right? So how much do you need to invest broadly? What type of footing do you need to have for your staff? What types of capabilities do you need to be able to have as a leader to be able to hold your security team to account for? We recommend a strategy that we developed. This was a concept that was coined by our co-founder, Dmitry Alperovich. You may have heard of it before. It's gaining some currency now. It's called the 1-10-60 rule. So we say, make sure that you get a detection on every event that's happening in your environment. That's the first step. And make sure you get that immediately. Do it within 1 minute. And you're going to need some tools to help you do that, but a lot of this is making sure, for the purposes of the next step, have someone look at that in 10 minutes. That's much more of a personnel and a training issue than it is anything else, right? So we talked about talent on the last panel. This is where the people really come into play. Make sure someone who knows what they're doing is taking a look at that very quickly. And if they determine that this is not a false positive, or that this is, it's not a user doing something who's testing or something like that, if it looks like there's actual adversary activity in your environment, you should wrap your arms around it within 1 hour, right? Isolate the host, remediate the issue, whatever your response process is, but do that within 1 hour. Some of our best customers are able to, the most sophisticated customers are able to execute on a concept like this right now. So you have a scenario where you've all seen statistics that say adversaries in an environment for 500 days or for 700 days, that sort of thing. That does happen on one end of the spectrum, but I promise you on other ends of the spectrum, there are people who are executing on this right now. And it's not just 30-person enterprises, it's people that have environments with 100,000 nodes or 200,000 nodes, right? These are big environments. We have a number of success stories of people being able to intervene, even though they're aiming for 60 minutes. Once you get configured to do this, to be able to isolate and remediate hosts within 15 minutes if there's a problem, 12 minutes. We get notes all the time talking about it. We also recognize that not everybody's going to be able to get there immediately. So we say, treat this at first, if you will, as an aspiration. All right? And from the perspective of leadership, when we're dealing with people in the private sector, this is people on the board frequently who might have a sense that their security team is doing the right things, but maybe don't have the technical competencies to oversee it very specifically. In government, it's senior leadership that have outlined their mission. They've said, look, we're whatever, name your military service, we empower our people to go take actions. I don't necessarily need to know all the details, but meet this objective. That's the type of objective that is starting to gain currency because people are saying, show me the work. Show me that you're doing this. And the first step is just tracking the data. All right? So it's just saying, where are we right now? Getting a baseline. And it might be that you're nothing close to 1 minute, 10 minute, 60 minute, this framework that we've outlined. It might be more like 4 hours and 3 days and 2 weeks or something like that. There's definitely worse out there. But if you're tracking it, you can drive that down month by month or quarter by quarter, week by week, however you measure your metrics. So that's the strategy that we recommend that people take. And if anybody wants to talk more about how we've executed this before, come up to me. I'll stick around for a little bit afterward. We have a booth outside. But at a minimum, try and take the concept of speed back to whatever your program looks like now. Think about whether your requirements for speed are outlined, whether they're informed by real data, and think about how you can tighten up those cycles. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.